All right. Um, I want to talk about Meta, which was like literally my favorite word before Zuckerberg made the stupidest, like most hilariously, obviously terrible branding pivot of all time. I'm not talking about Facebook. Facebook was literally like a good name. It was like a solid. That was so dumb. It was like impressive. Anyway, I'm not talking about fucking VR. So I'm talking about meta, as in like the shifting of the strategic landscape of a given like game. So I like came to know this term in its concreteness through Dota. It's like to this very day, like by light years, my most played game, but I don't really play anymore. But anyway, so meta is, I mean, so this is just a thing in like any. Well, I guess that's what I sort of want to figure out in my head. I mean, so the short version, it's definitely a thing in any game that's like a competitive, like, thing that has updates. So what meta is like it's the life cycle, it's the history of, like I said, the strategic landscape. So it's the history of changes to a game, but like the meta isn't just like these are the values of the game design right now. The meta is like this is the thought of like the greatest tacticians at work right now. Like the meta refers to like the basically like what is immediately dominant, and what kind of like necessary things to do and to know are like forced on everyone else within the like the ecosystem of play, due to the fact that like those are the dominant things. And it's like, so what I want to talk about is that like meta, I actually think meta, this notion of like being within this particular like moment of ideas about a thing that's changing. What happened to you? I think this thing meta, I think this is actually like an incredible expression of how it is precisely that we experience history. This is actually like our mode of relating to history, is like as meta. I think this is actually right, and I don't think anyone has used this word this way that I've seen before. Like, you know, like, so like right now we're in like we're in a bit of a transition between metas, but like we're like immediately after the meta of MAGA. So you can like you can kind of apply this conceptually at a few different like time scales, and it continues to work really well. And in actual fact, I would regard like understanding, talking about different metas, like this actually sort of clarifies the way in which experts of historical change about anything in particular actually describe that change, like how they describe history. Like what it means to be an expert kind of is like, I know all about this particular meta or these few particular metas and their transition. And an expert will generally describe like their particular information basically in terms of meta. Like, what was this? I was listening to fucking Rev Left Radio interviewed some, what's his name? about Iran, like a vast whatever of Iran. And like, I mean, I'd sort of listened to this before, but it's just a good example. It's recent in my head. The way this is articulated is through the shifting of metas, where there was like the sort of early 20th century universal-ish, like bourgeois revolutionary period, where like there was the dawning of a sort of constitutional monarchy style system, and then this led up to a pretty modern secular liberal democratic style of state, which culminated in the coup in the 50s. It led to this like hard shift toward like autocratic, like brutal, like old monarchy, blah, the Shah. I mean, there's already a Shah, but like, you know, we like completely fucking undid that the monarchy is like with parliament or whatever, and then that like hard swung through the revolution into the Islamic Republic, and now we're sort of entering a new period-ish. I mean, just you know, I mean, the fucking hawks and Zionists would hope that it's like that regime is collapsing, but I don't expect that. It's more like they are consolidating from a this kind of like having this aura of like speculative uncertainty of being this like outsider crazed regime compared to the standard world order. They're just like becoming like very much one of the normal people in the new world order, which is like a different vibe. So that's like a different international meta. And so then to switch to that, then so obviously you can sort of talk about international political economic metas. It's very easy to articulate history this way. It's actually very effective. Where like currently we're clearly in a transition from the unipolar moment to, like people say, the multipolar order. It's kind of right, but you know, it's sort of like doesn't really tell you enough. I mean, really explicitly what we're doing is like we're beginning the fucking Chinese century. Whatever you think of that, it's very much happening. And before the unipolar moment, obviously, there was like the classic Cold War era, as it's generally understood. The two worlds and the third world of like the capitalist, communist culture war at CIA and doing all this crazy shit and all this shit going on. And then before that, obviously, there's like, I mean, the world wars are kind of their own era, which are the period of the dawn of socialism and fascism and all crazy shit, and it's just the wildest thing ever. But then before that, I mean, that's the world wars kind of were just like a one big crazy transition, in a sense. But anyway, then before that you have this sort of classic imperialist era, which is like actual capitalism, where profit actually ruled, and the barons, the tycoons were utterly dominant, and that just blew the fuck up organically in the 20s and 30s, and just died. And so another way of sort of putting it is like there was, of course, this like Jazz Age, Silver Age, mad utter capitalism utterly killed itself, and then there is coming from like the FDR regime reacting to the Soviet Union existing, there is the era of Bretton Woods. Bretton Woods is very much a sort of meta of the international world market, and then neoliberalism is like the response against Bretton Woods, of like sort of trying to go hardcore back to raw capitalism, but it can't. Like it's like not just capitalism. This is the part people are missing when they talk about neoliberalism most of the time. It's not just like we're doing robber barons again, because they're like wholly relying on these like essentially like socialist state structures of like propping up and sustaining and like creating and maintaining like market mechanisms, which the whole point of capitalism is like you don't like need that or rely on that. It's like what people argue to this day, but like they just like don't understand that like that's just what's happening, and it's the only way anything can happen now. But anyway, so that's just off the top of my head. You could obviously explain all of that so much fucking better. So much fucking better you explain all of that. But like the point is that meta is a really good way of putting this. Because what meta means is it's like, it's implicit in the term as applied that there is a historical shifting of norms and that which is taken for granted and a given. So I wanted to talk about like the theory of it more, like the word, like why say meta and not just like era or something like that. So meta has like a bit of theoretical baggage naturally attached to it. It's not just like this particular period. It's like this period through the lens of like sort of cooperative and competitive like parallel integration of consciousness. So like it means like because like I said, meta is not just, so I said meta is not just like the values of the game. It's like the dominant sort of tactician's practice. So just apply that to like reality of politics or whatever you're talking about. Like meta is not like era might be or some other such word. Meta is not just like this is like who the president is or something. Meta is not just like this is just how things work objective. So meta is not merely objective. That's essentially the point. Meta is as well as objective. It's also like intrinsically a matter of like the diverse array of ideas and tactics at play in relation to one another and in relation to the objective. That's just like what the word like means, like as it is used by Dota nerds or whoever. Like it organically is a word that if you use it for anything, it like teaches you this style of thinking, which is essentially dialectical. So it's basically like an essentially like it's an emergently naturally fucking dialectical materialist term. That's essentially the thrust of my point here. So it's like you don't have to go fucking read the science of logic and then like the works of Stalin and Mao or whatever to figure out how to start thinking this way. Like literally just go fucking whatever your shit is, like fucking browse the forums of or the streamers who are like theory crafting about hero combos in Overwatch or some shit. It actually does this to you very naturally. It like provokes this style of thought where it's materialist in the Marxist sense because it's like wholly grounded in, predetermined by, and dependent upon at the ultimate point like objective factors. It's like determined by like this is what is at play that we are sort of in reference to, but then it is also like dialectical in the proper like Hegelian sense, in that it's like wholly a matter of that like this perspective grounds itself on the objective in this manner and therefore acts this way, and then this perspective anticipates that being the case and therefore acts this way, and then this perspective anticipates both and understands this further objective factor which like interacts with that subjectively occurring event and like relies upon this and therefore blah, 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 blah. Like it's like this infinitely inwardizing spiral of like complexity. That's like essentially dialectical motion, and that's like just implicit in talking about metas in a way that it's not in talking about like eras or whatever. So that's the kind of theory backing it up. That's like basically my point, is just like this like just happens to like this is kind of just like the masses organic generation of like Diamat theory, which is interesting, that's like going on. And you know, it's not the best thing in the world that like people are getting so fucking in depth about understanding like the Diamat motion of like Halo or something, but it is kind of great. It's like organically teaching people to think the appropriate manner and like actually like practically apply the thought and therefore found the thought in the appropriate manner. Like it's actually materialist now. I swear to God, because it's just all in the word. I don't know how to explain it properly, because it like what I'm thinking of is just like my learning of the word just being like going through fucking Dota patches and like the way people like emergently discover new meta through like experimental action and then therefore theory crafting based on new raw data. And it was very sort of like collective, anarchic, chaotic kind of thing. And then from that, a new order naturally arises that is the choice of no one. It's just like there is an organically emergent authority in how to practice in the current objective regime that comes out of all these different experiments of perspectives, and then that becomes this like new foundation and creates this new sort of like structure of expectations for like social and subjective states of mind. And then from there the tacticians sort of run forth, and then like this all culminates in like new forms of like just sheer dominance of particular things based on the current era. And there's like objective things to it and there's like subjective things to it in terms of like particular people are like better at this and like render it more possible. That's like not a strictly objective thing, or like whatever's going on. Just all of this is very much a dialectical materialist process. This is just like what happens when a Dota patch drops. So then so there's this like kind of like regime of like material efficiency guiding like the exchange of ideas is like an era, and then that becomes like the thing that like innovation must respond to, basically. And then like in some, and you know, in fucking games, this just means that like that guides what values are going to be adjusted, or the approach in new designs being taken in terms of like different content for the game or whatever. But like what that means, transposing that onto reality, what it means is like this is like the definition of that to which some person out there who's like thinking what the new must be is responding to. They're like that's exactly their sort of environment of creativity. So yeah, like I said, like this is all very much dialectical materialist sort of process. But the point isn't just that like it's an example of like dialectical materialist motion, because I mean dialectical materialism is like a total worldview, like fucking everything ever, no matter what, in all cases is dialectical materialist motion, if you like know what you're talking about. But this is like an example of this is the point is that it's emergently good dialectical materialist theory, and that's nuts. Because no one really, like almost no one articulates that kind of stuff very well. But yeah, I think it's this thing that came out of gaming culture of like an intrinsically hyper collective, like ultra specialized and ultra historically bounded kind of set of conversations and shit. I think this is just this thing that came from gaming, that like these are the conditions under which consciousness kind of like anarchically, eclectically like produces an overall general mode of thinking, which is effectively like dialectical materialist, so that's cool. So that's why meta is a good word in itself. It's a great word. It's like not the same as just saying like the era, the period, the fucking historical sequence, or whatever. It like necessarily includes this like mode of like consciousness interacting and learning and all this stuff, these processes. Okay, so then with all that in mind, like back to reality, so I mentioned and I swung off how like we're like post MAGA. So like the recent sort of like political American metas are like, so clearly there was like the woke meta that was like from the dictatorship of Obama culture, where like Obama was like the savior of the Democrats. There was this monoculture of woke values, and then the reaction against that was MAGA as like the new dominant form of culture. And then before Obama, what Obama was sort of responding to was obviously like sort of what culminated in Bush, and then like anyway, obviously now we're sort of working back to like when I was not particularly self-consciously aware of anything, so I can't necessarily speak to it as well. But I don't think the meta before Obama was necessarily like Bush. I don't think it's like just president. I think it was like the confidently unipolar culture of like America is the greatest and absolutely righteous and triumphant. Like that's the mode of consciousness into which the specter of like abstract terrorism was extremely effective as a motivation. But yeah, that's sort of coming on from the general unipolar moments, as like Clinton's the same thing kind of thing and stuff like that. But anyway, so there's like that, and then there's like the wokeness, which is like it's this expression, I think, of like that there was a deep sort of general sense that like great change must occur, but it was a product of just brutish eclecticism, which is, you know, basically what the value of what do you call it? Fuck, what do you call it? Oh, intersectionality. Yeah, fuck. So that's like the value of intersectionality. Intersectionality was sort of like the master fucking value of the woke era. And it just like intrinsically like means like a lacking of any like primary like form of like just problem or struggle or opposition or whatever. Like the value of intersectionality is that like everything is integrated with everything else, and it's like this massively parallel, like complex, nuanced structure of interlocking things to understand. And like that's not strictly stupid, but it's like it's just missing the historically bounded necessity of like how all such complexity is actually taken under the umbrella of a unity, and there is like a primary matter. So the woke era was this like culturally like hyper anarchic set of values. So now I'm talking much more about consciousness and shit. Like this is like the way that was like the meta. The meta was like we are suddenly revealing the like the character flaws in everything ever, kind of. Like that was sort of was like, and that's where canceling came from. There's like this awareness of imperfection, like got taken to like a crazed drive, but without any systematic unity. reintegrating any of these flaws. So there's like no possibility for redemption, because redemption requires like this more sort of integrated awareness of like, this is how such a flaw can come about in a way that isn't like essentially corrupt in terms of like the particular person. So then out of like that kind of meta, what that did, because it was like such a hyper moralistic like framing of every issue, which necessarily was like scientifically illiterate with regard to like the actual politico-economic like structure of anything going on or where the fuck, so it achieved nothing. Like ultimately. So because there's like this moralistic framing which achieves nothing, there's just this massive contradiction like viscerally felt by everyone in terms of just like, this is all a crock of shit. Because like, if we're being so like, you know, like sort of moralistically security driven, like we're all sort of like hyper focused on improving at the character level everyone, but it's not fucking doing anything, then it's obviously all fake. So MAGA that's like what MAGA was the response to culturally, and the sort of cornerstone sentiment of MAGA was just drain the swamp, basically. And the swamp is like the woke monoculture. And the swamp is also like generally the deep state. That's like a good term, and it's like the fucking imperialist, brutish bastard Zionists who are like bombing these people. But it's fucking wokeism, because like that's like how they are effectively selling the constant nurturing of that very system. It's like how they are effectively reproducing the facts that they can do that. So MAGA was like a very legitimately revolutionary sentiment in terms of like, it's about drain the swamp, that it's about destroy the deep state. Like, it's about that like the current so-called democratic liberal regime is in fact a dictatorship of oligarchy, and that must be completely smashed. That was pretty explicitly the sentiment. But now MAGA obviously, as like a sort of cultural moment like that, obviously also failed, because it was an utterly unscientific like revolutionary sentiment. So we're like in the moment right now of like it becoming normal for people to be like waking up to like, shit, why didn't MAGA work? You know, like Tucker's coming out against Trump. That's kind of like the aura of the moment. And I see a lot of people saying online that like the next, as I would call it, the next meta is like the fucking millennial Reich, which is just the doubling down wokeism. It's like out and out social fascism, basically. That's socialist in words, fascist in deeds. And I think culturally that makes sense as the most logical progression, as like, because like now it's like a recency bias thing. This is like the swing of the culture. So like now it's like the Republican Party that's failed, and it's the MAGA movement that has failed, and it's the Democrats' turn to be the saviors. So culturally that like makes sense. But like we're also right now in the moment of the American empire kind of collapsing a little bit. Because dollar hegemony is dying. It's like happening. Like out and out, like because of the Iran war. It's like not like slow anymore. Like all the fucking, like a shit ton of trade of like oil and gas coming out of like through that strait, and then in relation to that is like it's being traded under the Chinese currency instead of the dollar. So the system's going down, and more so the generally the Middle Eastern states are like losing faith in the ability of the American military to protect them. That's like not something that's believed now. So with all that going on, I don't really know if the fucking Millennial Reich can happen exactly, because the notion of it is that just like a sort of psychotic doubling down, like re-expression of wokeism without the kind of without so much of like the posturing of like civility. It's like sort of out and out supremacist moralism. I think, like I said, culturally it makes sense that that's the next swing, but you know, I'm not sure that will sustain on the grounds of like the economy being revealed to not function utterly if it goes that way. But you know, I don't fucking know, I'm making shit up. So anyway, I'm spitballing way too much now about the actual particular meta when I am far from the most capable of actually doing that analysis. But yeah, the point. So like you can talk about the meta of the culture war, this sort of like local, like the zoomed in level of meta. You can talk about the meta at the world historical scale, where we're like going from the American to the Chinese century, like we're going from the unipolar to the multipolar kind of system, and those kinds of ways of talking. But you can talk about like the series of metas for basically any like any system that can be treated as abstractly closed, anything that can be treated as like determinately like itself as distinct from anything else, like by the nature of reality, like it will have this kind of historical progression that will swing along. And meta is just like the way of talking about how humans perceive that and interact with it and live it. So anyway, I should probably just fucking shut up at this point. I don't know if I have anything else to articulate that's insightful at all. But yeah, I think this should be a normal word in anyone who's like doing analysis basically ever of anything, kind of. Because I mean, if you're really doing good analysis of something real that's like, you know, happening in a tangibly like expressible and perceivable manner, like now, it necessarily has this kind of history to it, and it necessarily is enmeshed within a chaos of like parallel and conflicting agents that have their own versions of understanding of it. And so with all that going on, there's metas. There just are metas. There's like a meta, and there's the old meta, and then there's the new meta. And this is just a really good way of putting it. I also just think it would be extremely funny for someone to one day be like, let me analyze the progression of like theory crafting in Heroes of Newerth in order to understand like this economic reality that's happening. That's like what I'm aiming for, really. I want to invoke upon the world this form of theoretical discovery, which I think is wholly plausible that like you would actually validly like discover and work with truth in that manner by discerning the kind of resonances between activities of people in diverse realms. And because so the games or whatever, the thing about those realms where there are metas is like they can function to provide clearer view of the fundamental motion of interacting consciousnesses, because they're just like so rigidly set. It's like an utterly closed system of like, this is what there is that can be worked with. And then in reality, which is like what fucking matters, it just is this infinitely complex unified totality of all ever, where there's no such thing as actually like wholly closing off this particular component to analyze. Like that is just a procedural matter. So in actual fact, it's like connected to everything else in ways that you can't necessarily account for. But you know, science is possible, so you can develop a procedure that appropriately limits what is taken into account at a given time in a way that sufficiently resonates with the motion of reality, such that you can fucking know what you're talking about. Yeah, I don't want to go into the theory of science right now. Like, not just so you can like make predictions, but yeah, so you can like know what you're talking about. But yeah, basically, I think people should be able to be like, guys, I have figured out the best way to understand and articulate what's going on with the current direction of like morbid financialization, and I have done this on the basis of this analysis of the progression from Halo 2 to Halo 3. Theoretically, this like is extremely plausible to me. There's like something really deep to this. So, but yeah, anyway, that's it. There you go.